I'm a nurse practitioner, and I've worked in these COVID ICUs for, I've been in ICU for several years now, but, it just really gets to me sometimes that when people don't want to count deaths, if they have like one more extra thing where they died of another thing, it's something else than COVID. So all the time we get COVID patients. In fact, we've doubled the size of our unit in a lot of cases, and we just run with 30-40% more patients that just have COVID. This is a new thing on top of what we did before, and we have our peaks and valleys just that go along with these surges. And when I get a COVID patient and the only thing that is wrong with them is COVID, and I hope that all hopes that it's just COVID, because a lot of the time it's not COVID ultimately that ends this person's life. It's another organ failure, a renal failure, a concomitant bacterial pneumonia after you get COVID. And I do, being in Ohio, work with people that, thank God not the majority of them, but that say, hey, I don't want this shouldn't count as a COVID death because they died of a bacterial pneumonia after they got COVID. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm taking crazy pills because I see it in front of me. And I don't know, I feel like I'm being gaslit all the time.
So let me just tease this out a little bit, because the point is that COVID becomes the midwife for another ailment that ends up being the specific cause of death. So that COVID is still a but for, we would say in legalese, for that death. In other words, if this person came in and they had, let's say, one functioning kidney, many Americans have that. You only really need one, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's only functioning at 75%. This renal failure can be. Well, I guess the way that you could say it is like, in terms of like sepsis, for instance, right? Somebody could have sepsis.
Sure.
It could seriously injure your kidney. The sepsis could recede, but your kidney could be so injured at that point that it could ultimately kill you.
Yeah, these things, they combine, and you end up with multi-organ system failure, and oftentimes your body can't survive that. It makes you particularly susceptible if you get COVID to getting a bacterial pneumonia after that. Flu was the same way prior to COVID. It wasn't necessarily the flu that would come in, but these concomitant infections, these post-flu infections that would come in and do some real damage in an already damaged lungs. And COVID, we see that same thing. It just ravages your lungs, and you get these bacterial infections, or you get septic shock, which can lead to renal failure. And we're dealing with all these things. They're there for 20 days. We can take them out of COVID isolation after that, but they're no longer infectious. So they're there for months on end, and then they pass away because all of these organ dysfunctions that persist, and they get infections. And well, it's after 21 days. They're no longer in COVID isolation, or don't count. People around me will say, oh, it's not a COVID death. And not the majority of people I work with, I should say. It's some, and then I see on the news that people say that I shouldn't count it as a COVID death, but then when they came in with COVID, exacerbated all these things. And like I said before, I hope that COVID, when they come to the ICU, is the only thing that I have to deal with them, because those can be the best, like single organ issue can be the best outcomes when you get critically ill or by the time you get to the ICU.
Right. Yeah. It is. I don't know. I've heard people say that more people die with prostate cancer than from prostate cancer, as an example, because prostate cancer many times is manageable, but prostate cancer does not, in most instances, create these secondary infections that end up taking a life on their own. I mean, COVID ends up being the catalyst for a lot of these deaths that people want to pretend is not a function of COVID.
Yeah, and I see it every day, and I see people like Jimmy Dore that go out and say that stuff, and it burns me up, and I feel like I'm crazy. And
well, dude, let me just tell you this. I can tell you this. I don't know for a fact that Jimmy is crazy, but I can tell you that if either one of you is, it is him.
Yeah.
He may also just, he may have also other incentives and other catalysts that are working on him at any given time. But hang in there and really appreciate the work you're doing. I can't imagine the stress that you have been going through over the past 2 years, and I hope we're getting close to the end of it, or at least the end of the worst of it.
I mean, I hope so. I haven't seen any flu this year yet, so it's all COVID. It's awful.
All right. Well, maybe if we get lucky, people will continue to wear masks a little bit during flu season, and you won't see as much flu after this is behind us. But hang in there. Really appreciate the call.
Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I mentioned this a little bit on Left Directing postgame, but I'm actually having, and it's very mild, and I'm lucky it's not, what other people are going through, but long COVID symptom in that I'm having an eczema. I went to a dermatologist, but like a weird eczema outbreak, and the dermatologist asked, like, oh, have you been sick recently? I'm like, yeah, I had Omicron like 3-4 weeks ago, and he's like, yeah, that's what it is. Like, so you have these things that, like, I have slight eczema on my feet, and now it's something much bigger because you've had what is some people are calling a cold, psychopathically irresponsibly. It's actually a pretty strange disease.
Yeah. There was a study, and it was only, I think, 200 people, and it was just released the other day about like 4 different factors that can lead to long COVID. And it can strike in many different ways. They're not going to really fully understand this stuff for at least
years.
a couple of years. Yeah. So really tricky.